Welcome to the Boom Bap Kingdom. Yo, peace, and welcome back to the Boom Bap Kingdom. Listen, you know why we're here. A lot of people are talking about it, Ableton, and that Push 3. And that Push 3 is a mean motor scooter. That thing is no joke. So the question is, what does Akai have to do? And what does Native Instruments have to do as well? Because they're still part of the argument, right? A lot of people, Akai is getting hit with a lot of stones right now because they're still considered the, number one. Now, just because you're considered number one, that doesn't necessarily make you number one. But they're considered number one, and I think because they kind of pioneered this movement along with others like, EMU with the SP1200, etc. But at any rate, we're coming into a situation where Ableton has really thrown their hat in the ring with that Push 3. And they didn't just throw their hat in the ring, they actually kind of pushed the envelope, which is, I think, some people's argument with, say, Akai and that SE. It didn't really push the envelope further. You just kind of got a little bit more power under the hood, right? So, at any rate, what does Akai need to do, and what does Native Instruments need to do to compete with that Push 3? So let's talk about Push 3 a little bit. I have some notes here. I'm just going to kind of refer to my notes. And so we know that Push 1 came out in 2013, and that Push 1 was a joint venture between Akai and Ableton. Akai developed the controller hardware. Ableton wrote the code, the software in Live 9. All went well. Push 1 was a pretty big hit. But there was some misgivings, and Ableton knew, we have to go back, to the drawing board, make this thing a little better, and, try again. So what happens? Push 2, that was released in 2015, and if you notice, Push 2, Akai was not in the picture. So I find it very ironic that Ableton kind of took Akai's idea and then kind of made it their own and put it out there. Sounds familiar. Nonetheless, that's what happened, right? So with the Push 2, you got some updates. You got a slightly better design. They released Ableton Live 9.5 to work with the Push 2. So there was some bug fixes and stuff like that. You got a better display. There was better pad quality. The buttons were better. So there was some improvement on the hardware and the software. And, that's a really long run to go from 2015 to basically the early beginnings of 2023 with one platform. That's a long lifespan. You typically don't get that in this industry. You're lucky if you get 5 years and then the next iteration is being released. So they had a good run with that Push 2. It was still controller based, still needed a laptop, wasn't standalone, and there was a shift in the industry, right? Native Instruments had made a big impact with controller stuff, right? Controller, laptop, gear, whereas Akai had started falling off after the 5000, and then they kind of found themselves for the first time playing catch up. So they released the Renaissance, which I thought was, whack. It was supposed to be a controller, but the thing was huge. It was like the size of a 60, a 3000, but it was a controller. And then they released the MPC Studio, not really the dopest unit. In my opinion, both the Renaissance and the Studio were misses. Akai got smart and they gambled and they said, yo, let's get back into what we know best, which is the standalone market. Releasing that MPC Touch in 2015. So that MPC Touch, that was a game changer, and that really brought standalone back as a whole, right? No one, you can't deny that. If it wasn't for the Touch, I don't think there would be as many prevalent standalone units on the market. So the Touch comes out, boom, it's a big hit. Akai they release a flurry of units, right? The Touch and the Live and the One, etc., and they work all the way up to the X. And then in the midst of all of that, in 2019, you get the Force. Now the Force is a lot like the Push. There's a lot of similarities. So you kind of have to wonder, did they do that because they were a little salty about how the relationship ended between themselves and Ableton? And then they said, hey, you know what? We're going after them. We're going to go after them and let's drop a unit. You kind of have to wonder, right? Because these corporate guys, they hang out, they're going to the same golf courses and they're hanging out. But behind the scenes, these guys are also competing with each other, right? I'm sure Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were homeboys at one point, but they were still competitors, right? So at any rate, that Force comes out and it's compatible with what? Ableton. Has the same workflow, clip-based, scenes, etc. Very interesting. So where are we at now, right? 2023, you get, this year, this spring, right? Push 3 is here. Ableton drops it. It has a lot of dope features, right? They have their version of skip back, like the 404 Mark II from Roland. They have obviously MPE, right, which is huge, and they have another huge advantage, which is modularity and upgradability, right? So now you're looking at this machine and it becomes more of an instrument / computer that I can upgrade over time, which extends the life of the platform. And on top of that, it extends the financial life, right? The total cost of ownership. So these are things we have to think about, right? Total cost of ownership. It's not a cheap platform to get into. So what would Akai and Native Instruments need to do to compete? One, we know they gotta throw MPE in their next devices if they want to compete. If they don't, if they just want to, you chopping up samples, playing samples, if they just want to stick to the same playbook, they can, right? But if they want to compete, they will have to throw in that MPE. Another thing I think they're going to have to do is pricing, right? The SE is a pretty expensive unit, but if you want full ownership in that Ableton Push ecosystem, that's very expensive. That's it. The average guy is not going to be able to run out and buy a Push 3, right? It's an investment. Now you can just get it out of the box with Live Lite installed and then upgrade the Live software over time. But every time you do that, you need a license, and that's going to cost you some dough. And, so you're deeper and deeper into the investment. Akai would have to maybe adjust their prices accordingly so they're a little bit more affordable, and that would kind of slide them in there where now it's a more affordable alternative. as opposed to saying, hey, let me take this amount of loot and go into this Ableton ecosystem. I might be able to take a little less and go into this Akai ecosystem with something new. However, Akai is still going to have to give you these features, this MPE. They're going to have to give you some modularity. Same thing with Native Instruments. They're going to have to give Native Instruments, the Machine Plus, where the industry is going is hybrid now, right? You can be standalone or controller. So it's kind of interesting that Ableton took the stance they took, where they offered a controller that has no standalone intelligence built in, and you can upgrade that over time. That is a very interesting stance. And then you can buy it fully kitted out if you want to go 100% standalone. So that's a very interesting business model. And you have to kind of ask yourself, will others follow suit with that business model? I'm not too sure that that's going to be a big hit. With that being said, we understand Akai Native Instruments have to give you MPE. We understand that they're going to have to come in at a lower price point, but still give you the features that you're looking for in order for them to compete. So the other question would be lifespan, right? When you look at the Push 2, I mean, that thing lasted almost a decade, right? And that's saying a lot. And I don't think anything from Akai or anything from Native Instruments really lasted that long before the new iteration of the device was released. So longevity with that same platform, leaving room to grow, I think that is an important feature. And I don't know if it's in the business plan for people or companies like Akai and Native Instruments to offer that. But we've already established they're going to have to give you MPE. They have to give you, skip back type features. They have to give you modularity and upgradability. And then they would have to give you affordability and lifespan over time. These are things that if they want to compete with Ableton and that Push 3, they'll have to offer. Now, that Push 3 is not the end-all be-all, because there is no SD card, which a lot of people, myself included, that's a little bit of a ding. Is that a, deal breaker? No, it's not a deal breaker, but it is a ding. I'll tell you why. This Wi-Fi file transfer, that's not going to be suitable for everybody. If you're a live performer and you take your Push 3 to a show and you're performing, that means I have to set up a hotspot. If I didn't get everything dumped on that machine, I need to set up a hotspot and set up a laptop and transfer files over Wi-Fi. That's a lot of work when I could just have a couple of SD cards in my pocket and interchange SD cards. You have to hope that in a future firmware update, Ableton will say, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and do file transfer over USB. So at least you can USB to your laptop, or even better, a USB thumb drive, a jump drive, an external hard drive, pop that in, transfer files, you're good to go. Hopefully they bake that in, so the lack of SD card support, the lack of USB file transfer, those are dings, in my opinion. Will Akai and Native Instruments continue to provide those things, or will they look at Ableton as the bigger brother and say, man, these guys are setting a trend, we're going to follow suit? That's going to be really interesting to see. Hopefully no one follows suit with Wi-Fi only transfer. I wouldn't like that personally if it stays that way. I can see why it would be a deal breaker for some. At any rate, The question would be to you guys, is the push 3 something you're looking at? If you're looking at it, why? Why do you think it's worth having? I would love to know that. So please comment below. You know me, I read the comments. I'm always hitting you guys back up, and I'm curious to know what you guys think about that push 3. Will I get it eventually? Yes, I'm gonna get a push 3 eventually. I think what I'm gonna do though is, like all things, I'm gonna wait for the first major software update. Because if you look at the Force, Akai had a lot of problems with that Force. And it took a while for them to straighten that out. A tilt screen would be really good though, Akai in Force 2. So I hope you guys are listening and watching. I need you guys to like, share, subscribe. And guess what? That beat from the last episode, I finished it. I'm going to put it at the end of this episode. And with that being said, I'm going to leave you with the finished joint and a BBK salute. Alright? Thanks for watching. Peace.